and let us dedicate our learning for Simcha Tuvia ben Avigail Pesha. That is somebody in our shul son, Simcha Kanner, his name is. He's also he's a Daf Yomi Magid Shir in the White Shul, very popular person. But his son Nebuch has stuck with this COVID in Israel, a young man. So he should have a refuah shalema.
Amen.
I always said I'm going to segue with this vart that I once heard, that it says Roifei Choyle Ama Yisrael. In Shemon Esrei you say Roifei Choyle Ama Yisrael. Why do you say Roifei Choyle Ama Yisrael, the nation of Yisrael, by refuah shalema? Because so one of the Mefarshim explained that some of the sicknesses that the Jews have is because they're part of Am Yisrael, because we are, we force ourselves to take on responsibilities at a young age. We're forced to live, more closer together in urban environments. And so we could always blame that a lot of the health issues that we have has to do with because we're Am Yisrael. We're always rushing and getting and buying and stressing ourselves out. So we sort of say to Rabbi Shalom, it's not, your sort of responsibility to us is very unique, because our health issues have a lot to do because we're part of Am Yisrael, and we take on all the achrayus of the mitzvahs. So why do I say that? Because this is a good introduction to our into our Mishnah, and our Mishnah deals with what is called a shoygeg. A shoygeg. If you shecht a carbon pesach, you're allowed to shecht a carbon pesach on Shabbos. If Erev Pesach comes out on Shabbos, you can shecht the carbon pesach. What is called a shoygeg? That if you shecht something that you weren't supposed to shecht, you're considered a shoygeg and you're chayev a carbon chatas. So let's just give an example, not by shchita, but by something that we learned in Masechta Shabbos. Do you remember the thing of Torah b'dvar mitzvah? You remember what that was? Torah b'dvar mitzvah.
We had a right. If somebody gives a mila to a katan who's day 7 or day 8 on Shabbos,
right? Day 8, or you're supposed to have day 9. Let's just take a look at it right over here. Very good, excellent. You see this case? The case over here is you have a boy that was supposed to get a bris on Shabbos, and you have a boy that was sick. It was only a mila that was supposed to get a bris on Sunday. He's not sick. He was supposed to get a bris mila on Sunday, and if you gave the bris mila on Shabbos to the Sunday baby, then you chayv chatas, because basically you didn't do a mitzvah. This would be day number 7 for this baby, because he's supposed to have the bris mila on Sunday, and you gave it on Shabbos, right? If you give it on Shabbos, then you're giving a bris milah to a baby on day number 7, you're chayev chatas. But this is the case I want to talk to you about. You have a baby that's a Friday. You're supposed to give the bris milah on Friday. For whatever reason, you didn't give the bris milah on Friday, and you pushed it off to what? You pushed it off to Sunday, because the baby's sick and he's yellow, so you're not going to give the bris milah on Shabbos, and you're going to give the bris milah on Sunday. Now comes Shabbos, and you have another baby that you're supposed to give a bris milah on Shabbos too. So this boy made a mistake, and he on Shabbos gave the bris milah to the baby that was supposed to have the bris milah on Friday. We pushed it off to Sunday, but you gave the bris milah on Shabbos anyway. It's called a milah shaloi bezmana. A milah shaloi bezmana. So basically, you made a mistake in a mitzvah, and what did you do? You actually did a mitzvah. That's the point. You made a mistake doing a mitzvah, and you actually did a mitzvah, because b'diavad, if you made a milah to a baby, even if it was a milah shaloi bezman on Shabbos, it's a good milah. Rabbi Lezer says you still chayev chatas, and Rabbi Yeshua says that what? You potav chatas, because since you're almost like an oinis. So we have a mazid, you chayev, if someone does a mazid on Shabbos, you chayev karet, chayev skila. If you do shoygig, whether you forgot at Shabbos, you chayev chatas. But here is the machlokes between Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua, and that's the whole Mishnah. If you thought you were doing a mitzvah and you did a mitzvah, Rabbi Lezer says you're still chayav chatas. Rabbi Yeshua says you're like an oinus, and therefore you're potter. Okay, therefore you're potter from bringing a carbon chatas. So let's read the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah will make perfect sense. Ha-Pesach sheshachtu shloi l'shmoi. A guy has a carbon Pesach and he shechts it not for the sake of Pesach. In other words, it's Erev, it's Yud Daled Nisan and it's Shabbos, and you're supposed to shecht your carbon Pesach, and on purpose he says, you know what, I'm shechting it for a shlomim. He did it by accident. He forgot it was Shabbos, and he said, you know what, heck, I'm going to shecht my carbon Pesach for a shlomim. So therefore he pasaled his Pesach, right? He pasaled his Pesach because it's not a Pesach, it was shechted for a carbon shlomim. So if you did this by Shabbos, everybody agrees, chayiv alav chatas, you chayiv to bring a carbon chatas. Ushar kol hazvachim. Let's say a guy was walking around the base of Mikdash, and he sees another animal there. He thinks it's a carbon Pesach, and it's Shabbos, and he shecht on l'shem Pesach. So he shechted it l'shem Pesach. You know, no one asked him. He shechted it l'shem Pesach, and then they come over to him, sir, that was a shlomin. You weren't supposed to shecht that animal. You thought you're doing a mitzvah by shechting it l'shem Pesach. In fact, it was a shlomin. You did it by accident. Now, if you shecht it l'shem Pesach, right? So then the carbon is kosher, by the way. That means that you didn't turn it into a Pesach. It still remains a shlomim. The carbon is kosher. So there's a caveat over here. Im ein ru'uyin chayev. If this thing that you shechted could not have ever been confused with a carbon Pesach, chayev. Because a carbon Pesach, let's say, is which two animals? A goat and a sheep. And this animal that you found in the base of Mikdash that you thought was a Pesach turns out to be a cow or a calf. So there was no tov b'davar mitzvah, because how could you have ever thought that this animal was a carbon Pesach? It's not an animal that's suitable for a carbon Pesach. So everybody agrees in that case, you're chayav v'chatas. But if this carbon, if this animal that you found could have been a carbon Pesach, and it turns out it was a shlomim, so you're a tov b'davar mitzvah. You made a mistake thinking you're doing a mitzvah, and you actually did a mitzvah because it's a kosher carbon. So then Rabbi Lezer still says mechayev chatas. You chayev to bring a carbon chatas. Rabbi Yeshua paiter. Rabbi Yeshua says you pater. So there's very subtle differences over here. Very important. Normally you chayev a carbon chatas if you mechal Shabbos by mistake. But Rabbi Yeshua has an out and says that there's a certain case that you'll be pater from chatas. What are the things that you're pater from chatas? If you tov b'dvar mitzvah and you did the mitzvah, plus you had a reason to be tov b'dvar mitzvah. That means the carbon, the animal that you found could have possibly been a Pesach. It was like a sheep you found a goat. But if you found an animal that's a calf, and there's no way to excuse your mistake, because as a calf, a cow can never be brought as a Pesach, that even Rabbi Yeshua says Yechai. So Amalei Rabbi Lezer challenges Rabbi Yeshua, and he says, Ma im ha Pesach shu mutar l'shmoi. The first case, a carbon Pesach on Erev Pesach on Shabbos, you're allowed to shecht it for a carbon Pesach. That everybody agrees. Carbon Pesach is doiche Shabbos. Kishashina shmoi. But if you shecht that carbon Pesach for a shlomim, so you turned it into a shlomim, everybody agrees chayev. That was the case number one in the Mishnah. So then Rabbi Lezer says to Rabbi Yeshua, zvachim, a regular shlomim, shehein asurim l'shmam, that you're never allowed to shecht a shlomim on Shabbos, right? Even if you shechted it the way it was supposed to be shechted, you would be chayev kachtas. Certainly, kishashina shmam, if you turn it into a Pesach, ein edin sheyeh chayev. Certainly you should be chayev. So why do you say ushar kol hazvachim sheshachtim shem Pesach? Why do you say it's pater? You should be chayev. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua says, "Loy, that's not so, because there's a difference. Ibamarto b'Pesach sheshinohu b'davar also. The first case, a carbon Pesach that you shechted it for a shlomim, you're projecting it into something that cannot be shechted on Shabbos, and therefore you're turning a Pesach into a Shlamim. That's why you're chayiv. But in my case, what I'm trying to do is take a Shlamim and by accident making it in a Pesach. And a Pesach could be shechted on Shabbos. The case of Zvachim, Sheshina b'davar muta, there, I think you're not chayiv a korban chatas. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Lezer is still not satisfied. Amber loy Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Lezer says, a murei tzibur yechichu. A murei tzibur means the karbonis of tamid and musaf, that will prove. A guy walks into the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos. And sees an animal and says, you know what? I'm going to do the Beis Hamikdash a favor and shecht it, and thinking that it's a tamid. I'll say that I'm shechting the tamid on behalf of everybody. It turns out the animal that was walking around the Beis Hamikdash was a shlamim. That means you'd be chayiv. Everybody agrees that's chayiv. Shehein mutar l'shmam. If it turned out that was the carbon tamid, then avada carbon tamid could be doiche Shabbos. But if they brought the tamid and a guy just walked into the Beis Hamikdash finding a little animal and says, "Oh, I think they didn't bring the carbon tamid. I'm going to shech this carbon for a tamid," and turns out it was a shlamim carbon walking around the Beis Hamikdash, so you would be chayiv. V'hashoiche l'shman chayiv. If you shech the shlamim for it as if you're thinking you're bringing a tamid, chayiv. So you're projecting it as something that could have been done on Shabbos, and nevertheless you're chayiv. So hence, same thing by zvachim sheshinu b'davar mutar. Your whole premise of why you're pater from a chatas is because you're taking the shlamim, turning it into a Pesach, and that's why you say you're pater. You're turning it in something that could be brought in Shabbos. Wait a second. On every time in the Beis Hamikdash, if a guy finds an animal, turns it into a tamid, he's nevertheless chayev a carbon chatas. Rabbi Yeshua says there's a difference. Loi, imamarta be'emurei tzibor, by a tamid is an emurei tzibor, is by carbonas that are supposed to be brought on behalf of the tzibor. Sheyesh lehem kitzba. There's a set amount. In other words, it's hard to say the guy made a real mistake over here. He was an oinus. Why? Because there's only one tamid brought a day on Shabbos. So a guy walks into the Beis Hamikdash, he should have asked, did they bring the tamid? What is this carbon? So there's no excuse for your mistake. Therefore, you chayev a carbon chatas. But a time of a Pesach. But my case in carbon Pesach, a guy walks into the Beis Hamikdash, Shabbos, that's Erev Pesach, and there's a bunch of carbonis walking around, a bunch of animals. He's thinking that the animal that he picked up was somebody else's Pesach. And so therefore he's slaughtering it, thinking he's doing somebody a favor. So he's tabed, and they tell him, no, it's a shlamim. So he's tabed bar mitzvah. He did a mitzvah, but there's a good reason why he made that mistake, because there's so many Pesachs running around, shein le kitzpah. On there, that's what Rabbi Yeshua says, you're potter. So Rabbi Yeshua requires tabed bar mitzvah, va'asa mitzvah, and they have to have a good reason why you made the mistake. Rabbi Meir says, "Af hashoichet l'shem emurei tzibur pater." Rabbi Meir is very lenient. He says you don't even have to do a mitzvah or have a good reason why you made the mistake. Even if you shecht a carbon for a carbon tamid, thinking that nobody brought the tamid and you're doing the tamid, you still will be pater from a carbon chatas. This ends the first part of this Mishnah. Next part of the Mishnah is something we've seen before. Let's say a guy on Shabbos, you're supposed to shech the carbon Pesach on Shabbos, right? But you shech the carbon Pesach shleila oichlav with the intention that nobody's going to eat from this carbon, or people who are not suitable to eat from this carbon. Let's say you shecht it for a nursing home. So therefore, nobody's suitable to eat that carbon Pesach. Or shleila menuyav, you shecht it on behalf of people who weren't counted into this carbon. La arelim v'latmeim, we shechted a carbon Pesach on Shabbos for arelim, uncircumcised people, or tmeim people, chayev, yechayev, because you shechted a carbon Pesach, that's a pasula carbon Pesach. You shechted on Shabbos by accident, you forgot at Shabbos, yechayev a carbon chatas. But if you have this hybrid kavana, you shechting the carbon Pesach la'oichlav v'shlei la'oichlav, for those that could eat, and some people in the group are not eaters. Lemnuyav, you're shechting the carbon for people who are registered on the carbon, v'shalei lemnuyav for those that are not registered on the carbon. Or you shech the carbon Pesach on Shabbos for lemulim v'lareilim, for circumcised and uncircumcised, or latmei and latayim for tummy people and tahirim people, all these cases, since the Korban Pesach is kosher, Potter, you're not chayiv v'chatas. In fact, you did okay. Now, says the Mishnah, ends off, let's say a guy shechted the animal, the Korban Pesach, shchatoy. Okay, you're permitted to shecht on Shabbos, but benimsa balmum. Then you find out that it's missing a leg. Chayiv v'korban chatas. Why? Because a shoygig is not an oinus. You should have checked the carbon beforehand. Check around to see if it has a bull mum. So if you didn't see that, if you didn't check around, you're like somewhat negligent, and you're chayiv to bring a carbon. Shchachtoi, but if you shecht it, benimsa treifa basesa, and you find, let's say, a adhesion in the lungs or something like that, it makes it treif. So that's something you could not have checked before. So you're an oinus. An oinus doesn't bring a carbon chatas, therefore you'll be potter from bringing a carbon chatas. A similar case, you shechted the carbon pesach, and then they notified you that that Bailam checked out of the carbon. They're not part of the carbon anymore. The owners died. That's something that the sheikhet could not have known beforehand. So then you're potter from bringing katas, but because you had the right to shecht it, and we're not faulting you for shechting it. It's this information only came known to you after, so it's not your fault, and therefore you don't have to bring a carbon pesach. Now the Gemara begins, b'maya skinin. What is the first case? The first case we said that a guy shechted a carbon shloi l'shmoi. He had a carbon pesach, and he says, I'm thinking about shlomim. And therefore, you chayev to bring a carbon chatas. The Gemara wants to understand. The guy made a mistake. That means it's a carbon pesach, and he's thinking that maybe this is a shlomim, and that's why he shechted it that way. Wait a second. Would that passel the carbon? If it passels the carbon, that's why you chayev a carbon chatas. But that's not true. If you think of false, if you think by accident something different than what the carbon is, would that cause the carbon to be not what it truly is? In other words, in this case, when you're thinking shlomim by accident, would that cause that the carbon pesach is no more a carbon pesach? That's subject to dispute in Masechta Menachos. And we don't want to bring a proof to our Mishnah to one side. So what must be the first case of our Mishnah? The first case of our Mishnah is Ela Ba'oike. The guy did it on purpose. In other words, the guy had a carbon pesach, and he says, on purpose, I want to turn this into a shlomim, but he doesn't know it's Shabbos. That's the key. So then, since it through his on purpose intention to turn it into a shlomim, it becomes no more a carbon pesach, and he did it by accident on Shabbos. That's why he's chayev to bring a carbon chatas. So the Gemara, Amos Sefer. Let's take a look at the end of the brisa. Any carbon, any other shlomim that you shechted it for a pesach. Okay, then in einin ru'uyim, if it could never have been mistaken for a pesach, it was never an animal that's suitable for a carbon pesach. For example, it's a calf, chayiv. Then you chayiv to bring a carbon chatas. Im ru'uyin hein, if it was suitable to bring as a carbon chatas, Rabbi Lezer mechayiv chatas. Nevertheless, Rabbi says you chayiv a carbon chatas. Rabbi Shua paita you potter because you taught b'dvar mitzvah, you did a mitzvah, and you had a reason to make that mistake. Now, the iba oiker, if it's on purpose, that means a guy had a shlomim and he says on purpose, I'm turning it into a carbon pesach, then it's not a kosher carbon, because then he's on purposely changing it into a pesach, which passes the carbon. So mali lu'uyin, mali she'ein ru'in. What's the difference if it was worthy to become a carbon pesach or something that's not suitable for a carbon pesach? Rabbi Shua should never say potter. He should say chayev chatas, because it's not tov b'dvar mitzvah or asa mitzvah. You didn't do the mitzvah, because a pesach, it's a shlomim that you intentionally turned it into a pesach. It becomes a pesach, but it can't become a pesach, so it's a pasul of carbon. Ela pshita. It must be that the second case of the Mishnah is talking about betoya. A guy makes a mistake. A guy had a shlomim, and then he thinks by accident that maybe it's a carbon pesach, and then shechts it for a carbon pesach. So since it was by accident, it doesn't lose its original name. It remains a shlomim. So that's the case. The case is a Torah b'davar mitzvah. You made a mistake trying to do a mitzvah, and you actually did a mitzvah. You didn't do anything wrong, because the shlomim remains kosher. Because by you thinking pesach by accident does not turn it into a pesach, it actually remains a shlomim, and therefore it's Torah b'davar mitzvah, also mitzvah. That's why Rabbi Yeshua says potter. So then you have a funny thing. It's not aligned, the Reisha and the Seifa. Reisha is talking about Ba'oker, the guy did it on purpose. The Seifa, in the second case of the Mishnah, is talking about Batoya, the guy did it by mistake. And that's unusual for a Mishnah to change the circumstances of cases in one Mishnah. And says the Gemara, Amar Rababin, and it's true. Reisha Ba'oker, the first case of the Mishnah is talking about the guy did it on purpose. The Seifa, in the second case, is Batoya did it by mistake. Now here, look at the fabulous piece of little Gemara over here. Ashkache Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef Rababo. The Have Koi Ochluse de Enoshi. Rav Yitzchak found Rababo, who was a great Amoira, and he was standing in a crowd of people. Now, in a crowd of people, when someone asks you a question, you tend to ignore them. But Rabbi Yitzchak, was persistent, and he said, Amalei Masnisa Mai. How do you interpret our Mishnah? What are the circumstances of our Mishnah? Amalei, so Rabbi Bo answered it in the crowd while he's in the middle of people. Reisha Ba'oike, the beginning, first case of the Mishnah, the guy did it on purpose. The Seifa B'toya, and the second case, the guy did it by mistake. So the Gemara says, Tana Minei Aboin Zimnan. He learned it from him 40 times. That means, the first part of the Mishnah is the Oiker, if I did it, Seifa B'toya. That's what he learned with him 40 times. He reminded himself 40 times. V'domalei command the Mache B'kise. And it was like it was put in his pocket. In other words, that now he understands it, and he still needs to review it, but it's like as if it's in his pocket, and he feels comfortable with it. I want to point out to you that you see in the Talmud that learning has to do with 40 times. First of all, Moshe was taught the Torah 4 times. He taught the Torah 4 times to the different Aaron, the Zakanim, the rest of the people. Then we find Rab Preda had to teach a Talmud 400 times. Here we see that the Tana learned with him. He studied the Pshat in the Mishnah 40 times. Something with this number 4. But if you think about it, even every page of the Talmud begins with 4 lines till we get to the Gemara. And they say that is probably the reason that you have to learn something 4 times in order for you to really understand it, let alone to remember. That's another story.
Moshe Rabbeinu was on Har Sinai 40 days.
Oh, right. Rabbeinu Har Sinai 40 days. Right. There's something about that 40, 400.
40 years. The Rebbe, the Rashi at the end of, was it Kisavo? It takes 40 years. 40 years
to understand the Rebbe, right. 40 years to understand the Rebbe. Very good. I didn't go. So now we learned in the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, Ma im Pesach shemuter l'shmoi kishashina shmoi. Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Yeshua that, why don't you agree with me? Ma im Pesach, in case number 1, shemuter l'shmoi, if it's mutter, if you shech the carbon Pesach, kishina shmoi chayev. When you change the name, you chayev. So, right, if you change it from a Pesach to a Shlam Yechayev, Zvachim, the second case, Shehein Asur L'Shmoy, you can't shech the Shlamim on Shabbos. Kishashina Eshaman, when you're going to change the name to a Pesach, Ein Edin Sheyechayev, certainly you should be Chayev, right? So basically, Reb Lezer is saying, why don't you agree with Rabbi Yeshua? Just like in the first case, we say Chayev Chatas. In our case that we're arguing, you should certainly say Chayev Chatas because we're dealing with a Shlamim. If you would shech the Shlamim L'Shmam, you're Chayev Chatas. So if you change it to a Pesach, you should be Chayev Chatas. Now, Rabbi Yeshua answers him that you're turning the Shlamim into a Pesach, which you're projecting it as something that's permitted on Shabbos. But really, there's a simpler answer Rabbi Yeshua could have said. He could have said that the first case of the Mishnah is talking about Oiker, the guy did it on purpose. That's why you chayav a carbon chatas. The Sefer is talking about the guy did it by mistake, and therefore he's more like an oinus. So Bim Isa, if it's true the way you're understanding the Mishnah, halaydame, it's not. You can't compare the first case to the second case. Reisha ba'Oikeir, the first case of the Mishnah is talking about you did it on purpose. A Sefer b'Toya, and the Rabbi Lezer loishonilei, it doesn't make a difference. True. He always says Yichayev Chatas. But Rabbi Yeshua, the Shanalei, that it does make a difference, Lishna Lei Hachi. Why didn't Rabbi Yeshua say to Rabbi Eliezer, that is exact, that is the difference. The first case, the guy did it by mistake. That's why Yichayev Chatas. The second case, the guy did it by accident. And therefore, it's Tob Deva Mitzvah, also Mitzvah. That's why I say Yapata. Why did he say a funny answer? So the answer, the Gemara says, Hachi Kamer Lei. That's exactly what he meant to say. In other words, there's an implied answer in the Mishnah, but it's implied answer, and that's what he meant to say. Hachi kamri le. According to me, loidami, they're not compared because reisha ba'oikid, the first case is you did it on purpose for sefer b'toya. Lididach, but according to Rabbi Lezer, you always chayef kates, but why don't you still agree with me? Loi imamarta b'pesach, a carbon pesach, shashina shmoy l'davar aser. You're projecting it to something that's aser. You're turning the pesach into a shlamim. That's why you chayef kates. But agree to me, in my case, taima b'zvachim, by regular zvachim shlamim, shashina shmoy l'davar amuta. You're trying to project it in something that is permitted to be shechted on Shabbos. Why don't you agree to me that in that case you should not be mechayev chatas? Amalei Rabbi Eliezer says, "Emurei tzibo yachichu." Let's say on a regular, the Mishnah continue, "Emurei tzibo yachichu sheim return l'shmam b'ashayich l'shman chayev." That was on a regular guy who finds walks into the base of Mikdash on Shabbos and takes any animal that he finds there and shechts it. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer, the Mishnah continued. Rabbi Shea says, "Loi imamarta be'emurei tzibo shekain yesh la kitzba." Emurei tzibo has no set amount. Has a set amount. In other words, the guy should have asked, did they bring the oilers tamid over here? That's why in that case, yichai v'chatas. But in my case, tamid b'pesach she'ein loy kitzba. The carbon pesach, there's another reason why you don't bring a carbon chatas. Because there's so many carbonis walking around the base of Mikdash, it's almost like he was forced into making this mistake. So he's a Torah b'dvar mitzvah, v'asa mitzvah, and there's ein loy kitzba. There's so many animals walking around the base of Mikdash. Therefore, he made the mistake. So, Lameimra, do you want to say, L'chol heicha the islay kitzba, but if there was a limited amount of possibilities, Rabbi Yeshua would say, Mechayev Rabbi Yeshua would be chayev, right? If there's a limited amount of choices, then Rabbi Yeshua would say, even if you did the mitzvah, but that's still a negligence, and therefore you chayev achatas. Take the baby case that we started from. The case of the baby case is a case where you're only dealing with two children. Utnan, we learned in the Mishnah, you have two children, two babies. One was supposed to get the bris milah on Sunday. That is the 8th day. So one's supposed to get the bris milah on Shabbos because that's its 8th day. And they were both in front of you on Shabbos. You shechted the Sunday baby on Shabbos, chayev. Why? Because you didn't do a mitzvah. You're shechting a baby that's only 7 days old on Shabbos, because the bris milah of that baby is supposed to be on Sunday, you chayev. Everybody agrees with that. But echad lamoli be'erev Shabbos, one was supposed to get a bris milah on Friday, and for whatever reason, it got sick or whatever, you pushed her off to Sunday. Echad lamol b'Shabbos, and one was supposed to get the bris milah on Shabbos, and now comes Shabbos, you weren't supposed to mal this because once it's a milah shloi b'zmana, it's not like you're not allowed to be Michal Shabbos with. But nevertheless, the guy shechted the Friday baby on Shabbos when he was supposed to shech the Friday baby on Sunday. So therefore, he is taught the mitzvah, asa mitzvah. Rabbi Lezer mechayev chatos, Rabbi Shua paita. So, but that ends the question. But what kind of choices that the guy made a mistake between one baby to the other baby? So therefore, it's something yesh loy kitzba. It has a limited amount of ways to make this mistake, and nevertheless, Rabbi Shua says yipater. So why is that different than a murei tzibur? Rab Mari says that case is talking about kegoin, for example, shekodem imol esel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos, that you mal the erev Shabbos on Shabbos. That means you mal the erev Shabbos on Shabbos, and therefore, the ika hak the Shabbos the tribe. You are distracted because of the one that was supposed to be on Shabbos. In other words, what made you make that mistake over there is because you have two babies in front of you, and you were supposed to mal the Shabbos baby on Shabbos, and you accidentally gave a bris milah to the Friday baby on Shabbos. That's understandable. But the case of the Beis Hamikdash is that they already did the carbon tamid already. By the case of the Beis Hamikdash is kegoyim. They shechted the carbon tamid already. So you walked into the Beis Hamikdash, you find an animal roaming around, you think, oh, they didn't bring the tamid, I'm going to do it, and shecht it, they already shechted the carbon tamid already. And that's something, now you're not busy anymore. There's no reason you should have been distracted to do that mitzvah. So in that case, if you did it, it was on Shabbos, you would be chayiv. So now the Gemara asks, if this is true, let's take a look at Rameir's opinion. Rameir is the most lenient opinion over here. Rameir, if you shecht l'shem for the carbon, if you walked into the base of Mikdash, even if they did the carbon tamid, you shecht something in the base of Mikdash thinking I'm shechting a tamid, you're potter. Afagav the kodem shechtin le'emuret tziba b'reisha, even if they shechted the carbon already, you'd still be potter. Well, Tanya, we learned in the Bresa, Rameir said, Rameir is talking about the machloikis between Rab Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Another Tana is explaining the Tanoim machloikis of Rab Lezer and Yeshua. Rameir says, well, Rab Lezer and Yeshua, that if you have two children, Echad Lomo Be'er Shabbos, you have one that you're supposed to get a bris milah on Friday, the Echad Lomo B'Shabbos, and one's supposed to get milah on Shabbos. And therefore, the Friday was supposed to be pushed off to Sunday. And you shechted the Erev Shabbos on Shabbos, the Chayev, Yechayev. So right away we see that Rabbi Yeshua, that Rab Meir is strict. Rab Meir says Yechayev a carbon chatas if you were busy trying to shech the Shabbos on Shabbos and you shechted the Erev Shabbos on Shabbos, you'd still be Chayev, even though you were busy with one, and even if you would have shechted the Shabbos one first, you're still chayiv for shechting the Erev Shabbos and Shabbos. So how do you make sense of Rab Meir's opinion in our Mishnah? How does this Rab Meir make sense with what he said in the Mishnah that afashoichet l'shem emurei tzibo is pater? But let's continue what Rab Meir said, and then the Gemara is going to say the whole thing doesn't make sense. The Rab Meir continues and says, Aman nechleku. What would be the argument between Rab Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua? If a guy had two children, echad lamel echad Shabbos, echad lamel Shabbos, one you're supposed to mal on Sunday, and one you're supposed to mal on Shabbos, and you gave a bris milah of the Sunday on Shabbos. That means you gave a bris milah for a baby on day number 7. Rabbi Lezer mechayev chatas, Rabbi Yeshua pipe. So the Gemara right away asks, "V'tizbra, does that make sense? Why should Rabbi Yeshua pater you from a chatas over there? At the end of the day, you didn't do a mitzvah because you gave a bris milah to a baby 7 days old, a Sunday baby on Shabbos. Ma hasam d'li'av mitzvah patar Rabbi Yeshua. In a case that he didn't do a mitzvah, Rabbi Yeshua says you patar. Heicha the avid mitzvah mechayev. When you do a mitzvah, you should be mechayev. And that wouldn't make sense. Why would the first case say Rabbi Yeshua say chayev when you actually did a mitzvah, when you gave the Erev Shabbos and Shabbos baby chayev? In the second case, he should say pater when you ended up giving a bris milah to a baby that's 7 days old. So the whole thing of this Rameir doesn't make sense. So it's not even a question to our Mishnah. Amrei, they answered like this: the Bei Rabyani, Reisha. The first case that Rameir is talking about is Koi Gagoyin Shekodam Umol Shabbos Be'er Shabbos. You gave a bris milah to the Shabbos baby on Erev Shabbos. Oh, you gave a bris milah on the Shabbos baby on Erev Shabbos. You didn't do a mitzvah, and you actually spoiled that baby because now that baby can't get a bris milah on Shabbos. You gave his bris milah early on Friday, and then the baby that was supposed to get the bris milah on Friday, you turned that and gave a bris milah on Shabbos. But wait a second, you're not even making a mistake anymore because there's only one baby that's supposed to get bris milah. That there's no baby that's supposed to get a bris milah on Shabbos. The baby that was supposed to get bris milah on Shabbos, you already gave it on Friday. The baby that's supposed to get a bris milah on Sunday, you gave it on Shabbos, but you only made one mistake. That's why everybody agrees Yechayev. There's no Shabbos to be pushed away over here because only one baby, you're dealing with one baby that's supposed to get a bris milah on Sunday, you gave it on Shabbos. Seifa, the second case where there is a machlokes, nitnu Shabbos litchos esloy. There was a Shabbos that you should push away because they didn't give a bris milah. The second case is talking about where you have a Friday baby, you have one's supposed to have a bris milah on Sunday, and one's supposed to get a bris milah on Shabbos, and they're both in front of you. Oh, so the Shabbos was supposed to be pushed off by the Shabbos baby, and you gave a bris milah on the Sunday baby, even though you didn't do a mitzvah. That is Rameir's opinion. Rabbi Yeshua would say you potter. So getting back to the carbon sibur, Shabbos could be pushed off by the carbon sibur, and therefore, Rav Meir's other opinion is that you don't need. Here's a key point. The key point here is Rav Meir's other opinion that you don't need to accomplish mitzvah in order to be potter from a carbon chatas. All you need to do is be busy with the mitzvah. If you're busy with the mitzvah, even if you never did a mitzvah, Rav Meir holds you potter. But you have to be busy with a Shabbos that's, Shabbos was a place that you could bring carbon tamid. So if a guy shechts thinking that he's bringing a carbon tamid, Rav Meir still holds your potter. So the Gemara says, Amalei Rav Asher Rav Kahana, Hachanami, even if you gave the bris milah of the Shabbos baby on Friday, and now the other bris milah of the Sunday baby, you're giving it on Shabbos. The Friday baby on Shabbos. Shabbos was already being pushed off in the world. People do give bris milas on Shabbos. So every Shabbos potentially is pushed away for a bris milah. For this person, the Shabbos was not pushed off for a bris milah. He had no baby that you're supposed to give a bris milah on Shabbos. And so he gave a bris milah to a baby that he's supposed to give a bris milah to on Sunday. He's giving it on Shabbos. No, nothing do. And bris milah, he was supposed to give a bris milah on a baby that was supposed to give a bris milah on Friday. He gives it on Shabbos. Nothing doing. He is chayev. So again, I just want to make it clear, and this is going to just make it very, very clear, is that I want to say Rav Meir's opinion is that according to Rabbi Yeshua, we said before that the only way you potter from doing a mitzvah, you potter from a chatas. In other words, Rabbi Leza always has yichai v'chatas. Rabbi Yeshua says you have to thought you were doing a mitzvah and did some mitzvah. Rabbi Meir holds you don't even have to do the mitzvah. As long as you can confuse yourself thinking you're doing a mitzvah, you're ready potter from a carbon chatas. One more piece of Gemara. I think we should do one more piece of Gemara. Ushar kol hazvachem. The Mishnah says every other zeba. The second case. Sheshachtim shem pesach amen ruin chayiv im ruin Rabbi Lezer mechayiv chatas Rabbi Yeshua poita. Man Tana the shana le ben ruin l'shein ruin. Who is the Tana that pushes into Rabbi Yeshua that says that Rabbi Yeshua has to differentiate between a carbon that's suitable for a carbon pesach and a carbon that's not suitable for a carbon pesach. In other words, Rabbi Yeshua says, in order for you not to be mechayev chatas, you have to make a mistake while doing a mitzvah, actually perform a mitzvah, but you had good reason to make that mistake because you were dealing with a carbon that looks like a carbon pesach. But if you're dealing with an animal that should never have been mistaken for a carbon pesach, even Rabbi Yeshua says yechayev. Who is that Tana that said pshat in Rabbi Yeshua that way? That's Rabbi Shimon. Tanya, we learned in the Braysa. Echad hazvam meruchim, echad hazvam shein ruim. V'chein hashaychel l'shem iburit tziba. Potter, divrei Meir. Meir is lenient opinion. No matter if you make a mistake in anything that has, if your mind was totally distracted because you're doing a mitzvah, then Meir says you're potter. You're potter from bringing a chatas. Rab Shimon, that's not true. Like Nechlok Rab Lezer Rab Shua al she'ein ruin shechayev, that if it's not an animal that could have been mistaken for a pesach, everybody agrees yechayev. If this was a possibility that this animal could have been mistaken for a carbon pesach, there Rab Lezer says mechayev chatas. Rabbi Yeshua poiter. Rabbi Yeshua says potter. Now, one final point. Okay. Again, Rab Meir is the most lenient. He says if a guy is distracted, right, or is confused because of something already, because he has some mitzvah in his head, then you don't have to bring a carbon chatas. Amar Rabba, Amar Rabbi Laza. Rabbi Leba said in the name of Rabbi Laza, Poiter hoyer Rab Meir. Rab Meir would say you're not chayiv a carbon chatas. Afila, even if you made a mistake and you shechted on Shabbos, egel shel zivchei shlamim, a calf that could have been shechted for a shlamim. It was a calf of a shlamim, and you shechted it l'shum Pesach by accident. Rabbi Meir would say you're potter because even though it's a calf, how could you have mistaken it for a carbon pesach? If carbon pesach is not an egel, still Rabbi Meir says you're potter from a carbon chatas. Amalei Rab Zera Rab Beba. Rabbi Meir would say, Rabbi Yochanan, Boydai Rabbi Meir Babali Mum. Rabbi Meir would agree that if it was a balmum, then Rabbi Meir would say Yechayv a carbon chatas, because nobody mistakes a balmum, an animal missing a leg, for a carbon chatas. Amalei. So the answer is babalmum. If it's the animal that you shecht was a balmum, like tarabahu, there's no busy. You're not distracted because of a mitzvah. But the case of egel shel shlamim, it was a real kosher shlamim. So the trid bahu, you're busy with the mitzvah, you're distracted because of the mitzvah. Therefore, Rameya says you're potter from a carbon chatas. Boiminei Ravam Rab Nachman chulin shlishim pesach. According to Rameya, if your guy shechts chulin and thinking it's a carbon pesach, mali Amar Rameya. What Rameya say to that? Amalei, he said, poiter Rameya fil chulin shim pesach. Even Rameya would say that a chulin turning it into a pesach would be potter. Wait, Rameya would say by a balmum turning to a carbon pesach, you are chayv a carbon chatas. Why? By turning a chulin to a pesach, Rab Meir would say you're potter from a carbon chatas. The answer is bali muim loy mechalche. There's no confusion a balmum. A balmum is something you can never confuse for a carbon. So you're like negligent. Hani, a chulin animal, you could confuse bichalfa. You could have confused it. You might have thought that this chulin has kedusha to it. It's a healthy animal. You might have thought that it was a pesach. So already you have some shmek of a mitzvah over here, and that's why you made the mistake. Oh, you have a shmek of a mitzvah. That's why you made a mistake. You're potter from a carbon chatas. Is the whole reason of Rameya is because you're confusing it? Rabbi Meir would pater even a calf of a shlamim that you're shechting it for a pesach. There, it's not a confusion. There, it's because you're distracted. The reason why Rameya paters you from a carbon chatas is because you're distracted. So the answer is to understand Rameya, and this is how we'll end. Amalei trid. Rameya paters you from a carbon chatas if trid. This is the point. If you're distracted because of a mitzvah, even though you couldn't have confused it. For example, by the egel for a Pesach, you couldn't have made that mistake because everybody knows an egel is not a Pesach. But since somehow this is a shlom and you had a mitzvah in your head, therefore you're potter. And michalaf the loy toret, if it's something that could have been confusing, even though if you're not busy with a mitzvah, like a chulin l'shum Pesach. The only thing Rameya would be mechayev you a carbon chatas is a bali mumen. Why? A bali mumen is loy michlufe michalav. You could not have been confused that as a carbon. A bali mumen can never have been brought as a carbon. Loy mitre trid, and you're not busy with a mitzvah because a bali mumen is not a carbon. And therefore, if you shechted it by accident, you think it's a Pesach, it means you're hallucinating. And therefore, it's no reason why you should have made that mistake, except you're a shoygig. A shoygig, you have to bring in carbon chatas. So basically, it's a very special Gemara that you learn is that when would be a person chayiv a carbon chatas, and when could you get away with it because you blame the fact that he was so busy with the mitzvah, that's why he made the mistake. And according to some cases, Rabbi Yeshua and Rameya both say you're potter if somehow there's a mitzvah in there, although Rabbi Yeshua is has more stricter guidelines, and Rameya has much more lenient guidelines. Okay, it's a very long piece of Gemara here, but I think we accomplished the main points of the Gemara.
Shkoch.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
very, very good. Onward and upward.
Yes.
Amen.
Take care.
Amen.